The DJ cut the music, but I don't think anyone noticed right away. The silence that swept across the banquet hall was heavy, the kind that sucks the air right out of your lungs and leaves everyone motionless. Guests were staring at the center of the dance floor, their champagne glasses frozen, halfway to their lips, unsure if this was part of the show or a nervous breakdown. Standing there, rigid as a board in his dress whites, was Jack Sterling, my sister's fiancé and the man everyone had been calling a hero all night. His face was pale, drained of all its arrogant color, and his eyes were locked forward in a terrified, unblinking stare. Opposite him, I stood there holding a plastic cup of lukewarm fruit punch, looking like I'd rather be anywhere else. I sighed, took a slow sip, and quietly broke the suffocating silence. I said, "At ease, Commander." But he didn't move, he barely breathed. He couldn't. Because in that moment, he wasn't looking at his future sister-in-law, the family disappointment who fixed computers for a living. He was looking at a 2-star rear admiral of naval intelligence, and he knew exactly who outranked who. To understand why my own mother tried to apologize for my existence 5 minutes earlier, you have to understand the lie I'd been letting them tell for 15 years. Rewind 20 minutes. The air in the country club smelled like old money, expensive perfume, and desperation. I was wearing my usual navy dress, conservative, plain, the kind of thing that makes you blend into the wallpaper and disappear. That was the point. I was trying to survive another one of these events without an incident, but my mother, Patrice, a woman who viewed her children solely as accessories to her own vanity, had other plans. She was parading Jack and my sister Sarah around like prize ponies, soaking up the envy of the neighborhood. I tried to duck near the buffet table to avoid the inspection, but Patrice cornered me between the shrimp cocktail and the ice sculpture. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned my outfit, looking for a flaw. Finding none, she reached out and aggressively adjusted my collar, her nails, digging slightly into my neck, a physical reminder of who was in charge. Then came the whisper, sharp and venomous, designed to keep the guests from hearing her disdain. "Please, Elara," she hissed through a fake plastered-on smile. "Jack is a SEAL. He's a warrior. He has seen things you couldn't possibly understand. Don't bore him with your little data entry stories." I stared at her, feeling that old familiar burn in my chest. She continued, her voice dropping lower. "Just nod and smile. Let Sarah shine today. God knows she's the only one giving us a legacy worth talking about." I almost laughed right in her face. It was tragic, really. For a decade, I had let them believe I was a low-level IT support tech, fixing printers and resetting passwords in a basement somewhere. It was easier than explaining the security clearances or the classified deployments. She looked at me with such pity, thinking I was envious of Jack's trident pin. She didn't know that the orders sending his team into the fire usually came across my desk first. She thought she was protecting a war hero from a boring it girl. She had no idea she was about to introduce a wolf to a dragon. To my mother, my life was a vacuum, a distinct lack of achievement that she felt compelled to apologize for at every social gathering. In the meticulously curated museum of her life, I was the dusty exhibit in the back corner that nobody visited. The narrative she had constructed was simple and devastatingly effective. I was the unlucky one, the spinster with the dead-end job in tech support who just couldn't seem to get her life together. It wasn't just that she was disappointed in me, it was that she was embarrassed by me viewing my privacy as a personal defect she had to manage. Then there was Sarah, the family's designated golden child, a woman who treated compliance like a personality trait and whose greatest talent was never challenging our parents' worldview. Sarah was pretty, she was manageable, and most importantly, she was marrying a Navy SEAL. To my mother, that was the apex of human achievement. I watched from the sidelines as they planned the wedding, listening to my mother gush about Jack the hero while throwing pitying glances my way. I knew exactly what she was thinking, that if I just wore more makeup or talked less about books, maybe I could land a man half as impressive as Jack. The irony of it all was corrosive, eating away at my patience day by day. They thought I missed Christmas dinner last year because I was busy with work, a phrase my mother repeated, with exaggerated air quotes to imply I was probably just sitting alone in my apartment eating takeout. I remembered that night vividly, but not the way they did. While they were carving a turkey and complaining about my absence, I was 300 feet underwater in the North Atlantic, sitting in the command center of a submerged submarine. I wasn't fixing a router, I was coordinating a black ops extraction of a compromised asset from hostile territory. My reality was a world they didn't have the security clearance to imagine, let alone understand. I wasn't just in the Navy. I was the director of cyber warfare for the Office of Naval Intelligence, a rear admiral, upper half. In my world, I didn't get pitying looks, I got silence and absolute obedience. My days were spent in a skiff, a sensitive compartmented information facility, where the air was always scrubbed, cold, and the only sound was the hum of servers and the quiet clipped tones of decision-making. When I walked into a briefing room, chairs scraped against the floor as seasoned captains and commanders snapped to attention. I tried to reconcile these two versions of myself, but the gap was becoming impossible to bridge. My mother constantly critiqued my lack of social media presence, calling it weird and telling me I looked like a loser to the outside world because I didn't have an Instagram full of brunch photos. She didn't understand that my digital footprint was scrubbed by the Department of Defense as a matter of national security. While she was worrying about likes and engagement, I was authorizing level 5 kinetic strikes on confirmed terror cells. I held the lives of thousands in my hands, making calls that would shift geopolitical borders, yet I had to sit at the kids' table during Thanksgiving because Sarah needs the support right now. The friction came to a head when the engagement party invitations went out. I saw the name on the card, Commander Jack Sterling, and I felt a cold jolt of recognition. I didn't just know him as Sarah's fiancé, I knew his service number, his training scores, and his entire operational history. I had personally signed off on his last 3 deployment orders. I had reviewed the after-action reports from his time in the Horn of Africa. To my family, he was a mythical warrior. To me, he was a devastatingly effective asset under my command authority. I debated skipping the party entirely. It would have been the easy choice. Feign another work emergency, stay in the shadows, and let them have their night. But then I thought about the way my mother had looked at me earlier that week, the way she had sighed and said, "Try not to embarrass us, Elara." That was the tipping point. I realized that hiding was no longer protecting me, it was enabling them. I knew something they didn't. Jack Sterling was a professional. And every professional in the Navy knows the face of the Director of Cyber Warfare. My official portrait hung on the chain of command wall at his base in Coronado. Staring down at him every single day he walked into headquarters. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror before I left, smoothing down the simple Navy dress that my mother hated so much. I wasn't bringing my uniform, but I was bringing the truth. If they wanted to judge the uniform, I decided, they were finally going to have to respect the rank. I walked into that ballroom knowing 2 things. 1, the shrimp was probably frozen. And 2, Commander Sterling was about to have the most terrifying social encounter of his career. When I finally stepped into the ballroom, I moved with the precise, measured gait I used when entering a briefing room, not the apologetic shuffle my family expected. To them, my silence wasn't discipline, it was just another symptom of my perpetual unhappiness, a sulky phase that had lasted 30 years. My sister Sarah, the bride-to-be who viewed the world through a filter of aggressive optimism, intercepted me near the bar. She squeezed my arm with a pitying smile, leaning in to whisper like we were conspiring teenagers. "Jack is so nervous about meeting everyone, Ellie," she said, her voice dripping with unearned condescension. "So please, try not to be so bureaucratic, just be fun for once, okay?" I looked at her, and the absurdity of it almost made me laugh. She was worrying about me boring him with spreadsheets, completely unaware that the bureaucracy she mocked was the only reason her fiancé had made it home from his last deployment. I swallowed the retort burning on my tongue, a detailed explanation of how being fun doesn't extract a team from a hostile border crossing. I just nodded, adding her comment to the mental archive where I stored every slight, every overlooked birthday, and every time they spoke over me at dinner. Across the room, the atmosphere shifted as my mother signaled the DJ to cut the music. She wasn't satisfied with just ignoring me. She needed a prop to make Sarah shine brighter, and I was always the convenient shadow. I watched her move toward the stage, a predator sensing weakness, ready to use my perceived mediocrity to elevate the family's new golden boy. That was when I finally saw him clearly. Commander Sterling stood near the head table in his dress whites. My eyes instinctively went to his chest, cataloging the ribbons. Navy Cross, Purple Heart, and the campaign ribbon for the Horn of Africa. My pulse slowed. I knew that ribbon because I had authorized the mission parameters for Operation Red Sand. I wasn't a stranger. I was the tactical commander who had been the voice in his earpiece. A normal person would have hidden in the bathroom to avoid the scene. But as I watched my mother preen, something inside me hardened. I didn't retreat. I walked to the center of the room, clasped my hands behind my back and set, my feet shoulder-width apart. A subtle shift from sister to officer. Mom tapped the microphone, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a public roast. She cleared her throat, preparing to dig my grave. Instead, she was digging her own. My mother's voice boomed through the speakers, distorted slightly by the cheap sound system, but her tone was crystal clear. She gestured to me with a limp, dismissive wave of her hand, like she was pointing out a stain on the carpet. "And this is Elara," she announced, her laugh tinkling like shattered glass. "Our late bloomer. She works with computers in the Navy back office, somewhere deep in the basement, I assume." She paused for effect, waiting for the polite chuckles from the crowd, and when she got them, she twisted the knife deeper. "Maybe you can help her fix her printer sometime, Jack? We are so embarrassed she couldn't even dress up for such an important night." But you know how it is. Some people just don't have that spark. I stood there, motionless, letting the humiliation wash over me one last time. It was a familiar weight, the same heaviness I felt when they forgot my college graduation, the same coldness, from when they asked me to sit in the back row at my cousin's wedding so I wouldn't ruin the photos. I watched Jack turn toward me, a polite, conditioned smile plastered on his face, ready to shake hands with the it girl and play along with my mother's little game. He looked relaxed, confident, until our eyes met. The change was instantaneous, violent, and absolute. It was like watching a circuit breaker trip behind his eyes. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer primal terror that I had only ever seen on the faces of junior officers who had made catastrophic mistakes. The color didn't just drain from his face, it fled, leaving him ashen against the stark white of his uniform. He wasn't looking at his fiancé's boring sister anymore. His brain had bypassed the social setting and engaged the deep, override protocols drilled into him during Bud. He recognized the specific intensity of my stare, the same stare that looked down on him every single morning from the chain of command photos on the wall at Coronado. His hand went slack. The crystal tumbler of scotch he was holding slipped through his fingers and shattered. Against the hardwood floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Nobody moved. Before the glass even settled, Jack's body snapped, literally snapped, into a rigid position of attention, his spine stiffening as if electrified. The air left the room. Then he barked, his voice cracking with the kind of volume used to cut through combat noise. "Admiral on deck." His hand flew to his brow in a salute so sharp it vibrated with adrenaline. "Rear Admiral Kent, ma'am," he shouted, staring 1,000 yards through my forehead, sweat instantly beading on his brow. I had no idea you were the..." He choked on the words, unable to reconcile the terrifying figure from his briefings with the woman standing next to the buffet. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, let out a nervous, confused giggle. She touched Jack's arm, treating his panic like a cute social quirk. "Jack, honey, stop teasing her," she cooed, trying to pull his arm down. "It's just Elara. You don't have to..." Jack recoiled from her touch as if she were radioactive. He broke protocol just long enough to snap at her, his voice trembling with genuine fear. "Patrice, be quiet," he hissed, eyes never leaving mine. "This is the Director of Naval Intelligence Operations. She is a flag officer. She outranks God in this zip code." The silence that followed was delicious, heavy, and absolute. I let it hang there for 3 agonizing seconds, letting the words sink into the drywall, letting my mother process the impossibility of what she had just heard. I looked at her, seeing her mouth open and close without sound, and then I looked back at Jack. I slowly, casually raised my hand and returned the salute, a lazy, practiced motion that only high rank allows. "As you were, Commander," I said, my voice calm, low, and echoing in the stillness. "And congratulations." Sarah is a lucky woman. Jack didn't relax. He remained at attention, sweating profusely, looking like he wanted to phase through the floorboards. "Thank you, Admiral," he whispered. The silence in that room was heavy. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. My mother looked at me, and for the first time she didn't see her disappointment. She saw what the U.S. Navy saw: authority. The silence broke quickly, replaced by a frantic scramble. People who hadn't even looked at me all night, my aunt, my mother's friends, distant cousins, were suddenly pushing forward, names spilling out, trying to network with a flag officer. I felt a cold surge of vindication, watching the social hierarchy collapse in real time. Commander Sterling, however, was in genuine distress. He stumbled forward, whispering frantically, "Admiral, ma'am, I am so sorry. Am I in violation of fraternization protocols? I had no idea of your identity. My fiancé is my—" I cut him off gently, my voice low and authoritative. I assured him he was fine, but the damage was done. The barrier of irrefutable rank was established between us. My mother, Patrice, was the only one who tried to seize control of the narrative. She swept toward me, her face bright and totally devoid of apology, only calculation. She threw her arms out for a hug, ready to pivot instantly from disappointment to my famous daughter, the Admiral. Her voice was shrill with false pride. "My daughter, the Admiral. Oh, Elara, why didn't you tell us? We could have bragged. We could have had the Secretary of the Navy at the wedding." I didn't hug back. I held up my hands, stopping her dead in her tracks. I looked her directly in the eye, and the coldness of the skiff, my real world, entered my voice. "I didn't tell you, Mother," I said clearly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "I didn't tell you because the work I do requires absolute discretion. It requires a silent dedication that doesn't seek public validation, and it requires a profound respect for security. Something this family lacks." The smile slipped from her face, replaced by pure confusion. I didn't want a tearful confrontation or a hollow apology. I wanted peace, and I realized I could only get it by using the bureaucracy she hated as my shield. I continued, explaining in calm, measured tones that because my identity and position, my level 5 clearance, had been publicly exposed, at her event, I would now have to sever and severely limit all contact with my civilian circle to protect operational security. This wasn't a choice, it was a consequence of their spectacle. I told her that for her own safety and the integrity of national intelligence, I simply couldn't risk the proximity anymore. It was the most polite, professional, and undeniable way I could say, "I'm cutting you off forever, and the Navy mandates it." I walked away from the engagement party not with the sorrow of the outcast, but with the profound quiet freedom of the liberated. I had finally severed the cord of expectation that had choked me for decades. 1 year later, the incident was just a cold memory. I was no longer Elara Kent, the late bloomer at the buffet. I was Rear Admiral Kent, now based in the Pentagon, working in an environment where authority was visible and respect was earned, not inherited. My new world was sterile, focused, and utterly devoid of performance. When I spoke, people listened because my analysis was sound, not because they were obligated by blood. I was surrounded by a true family, one built on mutual respect, competence, and shared risk, a connection stronger than any familial obligation. A heavy linen envelope arrived at my private address, Sarah and Jack's wedding invitation. I paused, feeling nothing but a faint, tired indifference. I thought about the hours Jack had spent standing at attention that day, the fear in his eyes, and the sheer cost of my mother's status game. I signed off on an expensive generic gift from a department store and wrote regrets. Classified engagement on the RSVP card before shredding the original envelope. I didn't need to attend to prove my worth. My silence spoke volumes. The true victory wasn't the salute. It was the profound, quiet freedom that followed. I realized that for too long I had sought validation from people incapable of giving it. My mother wanted a legacy she could show off at parties. I chose a legacy that keeps the country safe while she sleeps. Some heroes are celebrated with toasts, the real ones are acknowledged with a salute. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known, you best hit that like button and tell your story in the comments. Dismissed.